the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome to the show. First up is former Conservative Cabinet Minister Justine Greening on why she opened up about being in a relationship with a woman.
You can't be at your best if you can't be yourself.
Dave Penman, leader of the top civil servants trade union, on the bullying allegations facing the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab.
We think more than 24 civil servants have come forward, 8 separate complaints, 3 different government departments over a period of 4 years.
Get your tissues at the ready. It's the Conservative MP, Sherilyn McCrory.
And my worst fear that I've had, it's bizarre that it's happened to me, was that I would have to go through childbirth, would not have a baby at the end of it.
All that after your news.
I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Lancashire police are working to identify a body that was recovered from the River Wyre. It was located in the area where the mother of 2, Nicola Bully, disappeared more than 3 weeks ago. They're currently treating the death as unexplained and say her family has been informed of the latest development. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has described the news as heartbreaking and distressing. Former Detective Chief Inspector Mike Neville says the post-mortem examination might not give us the information about what happened.
there'll be a formal identification. The body's obviously, if it is Nicola, has been in the river a long, nearly 3 weeks, or best more than 3 weeks. So whether the post-mortem can ever tell us whether she entered deliberately or by accident, perhaps we'll never know. There's been too much speculation in this case, of course. We've had all sorts of ghouls going down there and causing even more hurt for the family. So the sooner the police can get the post-mortem and the identification done, I'm sure they'll be keen to get that information out there.
A cabinet minister says Boris Johnson's intervention on the Northern Ireland Protocol is not unhelpful because there's still plenty of work to be done. Mr Johnson's warning that scrapping the bill would be a great mistake comes a day after Rishi Sunak and the European Commission president said they've made very good progress on fixing problems with the post-Brexit trading arrangements. The protocol bill introduced under Johnson gives the UK the right to ignore EU rules, and the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, believes that gives the government a stronger bargaining position.
I think, it's helpful to remind the EU that we have the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. It's helpful to remind them what those expectations are. But I would also just say that, look, there are encouraging signs. There is... people are saying there's a lot more to do, but progress is being made.
Sir Keir Starmer says under no circumstances will Labour do a deal with the SNP. Addressing a party conference in Edinburgh, he urged Scottish voters to put their faith in Labour in the wake of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation. Sir Keir says he can bring change Scotland needs, and the tide is turning on the Tories and the SNP.
Over 15 years in power. And what do they have to show for it? Honestly, it's always somebody else's fault. And the reason is simple. They're not truly invested in Scotland's success. Anything Scotland achieves within the UK is met with gritted teeth, seen as a roadblock to the one true goal. Whatever happens in the coming months, my message is the same. No deal under any circumstances.
Meanwhile, Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have announced they're in the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon as SNP leader. Revealing their plans in the Sunday Mail, they're the first to declare their candidacy for the contest. Environment Minister Mhairi McCallan has now said she's not standing, but it's still thought Finance Secretary Kate Forbes could be a contender. Nominations close next Friday and the winner will be announced at the end of March. The US Secretary of State has warned China will face serious consequences if it provides lethal military aid to Russia. Antony Blinken spoke to the country's top diplomat, Wang Yi, on the sidelines of the Global Security Conference in Munich. The US believes Beijing is considering sending weapons and ammunition to Russia for the war in Ukraine, which China denies. And the musical programme for the King's coronation has been revealed. An anthem written by composer Andrew Lloyd Webber is one of 12 new pieces to be played during the ceremony. Best known for musicals including The Phantom of the Opera and Jesus Christ Superstar, he said he's incredibly honoured to have been asked. Greek Orthodox music will also be played on that playlist, a personal request by the King Charles as a tribute to his late father. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. I'll have more news for you at the top of the next hour.
Justine Greening, Rotherham born and bred.
Very proud of that.
The first in your family to go to university. You had some big jobs in the Conservative government, Education Secretary, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Transport Secretary, International Development Secretary. But you sort of fell out of love with Boris Johnson's government before you stood down in 2019. What happened? Are you still a Conservative?
I'm still a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party, and I mean, basically had the whip withdrawn. So it was probably more the party leadership falling out with me in a sense. And I think obviously that was around Brexit and the fact that I represented a very Remain constituency and wanted to faithfully do that in my job as a constituency MP. Of course, the irony was the whip being withdrawn was the fact that I was really unhappy about the Northern Ireland Protocol in the bill that the government was trying to get through Parliament. And I guess with hindsight, the government ended up sharing my concerns. But at the time, they weren't on the same page. But, you know, I was probably one of those people just flagging up that I was really worried about it not working. And that was correct. But no, you know, I think Brexit was one of those issues where people were taking a particular position, but on the broader levelling up work, Boris and I were 100% aligned on all of that and the priority.
Your party's obviously, since you left and actually just in the run-up to you standing down from Parliament, has been through a turbulent time. We now have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. Did you vote for him, by the way?
Oh, I've never said who I voted
fair enough. Can't blame him for trying. I was interested in an article that you wrote for the Yorkshire Post recently, last month. You said this: Sunak has sought to portray himself as a better manager as Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street. It's crucial, but not enough. This is the line that really interested me. Running Britain is not the same as leading it. Just expand on what you meant by that.
I meant what I said. I think in politics, if you really want to drive change and create a better version of Britain, which is for me what it's all about, there are times when you have to go, right, we're going this way. And there'll be some people who don't agree with everything you're doing. There'll be other people who think it's brilliant. But actually, it's just that sheer clarity and single-mindedness that I think the country needs right now, particularly on levelling up, which does require an ambitious policy agenda, but it is much, much more than that. It's about how businesses change and employers look at their opportunities. It's about almost society and what we should expect in terms of the opportunities we get in our lives. And that is a really fundamental different version of Britain. And in the sense, you're not just going to run Britain better and have it happen. People expect government to be run well. That's the least they expect. What they, I think, also want to see is a really very different, fairer version of Britain created after Brexit. I think this sense of take back control was actually people saying, I don't feel if I work really hard that I get on anymore. And that's not acceptable. And for me, that's as much about a levelling up agenda as it was about our country's relationship with Europe. And so that's the agenda I think Sunak really needs to passionately say, I am going to do this and I'm going to drive change and I'm going to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. I'm going to do what it takes to deliver for the communities like we grew up in, whether it's Bradford or whether it's Rotherham, who've waited too long, in my view, for things to feel like they're getting better.
We're going to talk a little bit more about politics, but I just wanted to take you back to June 2016. This is a happy memory, I assume. You revealed on Twitter that you were in a happy same-sex relationship. You previously had relationships with men. Mm-hmm. So talk me through what changed, or perhaps nothing changed, perhaps sexuality is just fluid. Put it in your own words.
I think I just met someone who I fell in love with and it was as simple as that. And actually, I think it's just such a good example of you just have to follow how you feel about something and be happy, actually. And that is the most important thing, I think, in anyone's life. You know, you put a lot of your time into work, into things that you might care about, but fundamentally, you should be doing things that make you happy. And so when I met Tess, I did kind of think, God, I can kind of tell how I'm feeling, but, you know, maybe that was a bit of a surprise. But I just thought, well, this is too important to me to sort of think, well, hang on, that doesn't quite fit with, you know, what I was expecting. So there you go. And we're still together, still really happy. So, yeah, but it was, I think that moment when I'd done the tweet, but I hadn't touched that bit of screen. You know, I just remember thinking, somehow my life's going to change. And I thought, based on everyone else I'd kind of listened to people like David Mondell, who's a really great mate of mine in Cabinet, I thought it would change for the better. But before you do that, you're not sure. And really, none of us should have to go through any of this, actually. But I think whilst we're on that journey, then I'm part of how we can normalise things and make people realise it really isn't such a big deal. In fact, it's probably not that interesting. So, yeah, I remember thinking, right, this will be different afterwards. I'm not sure how. It was different, way better. So, much better.
And you'd been in the relationship with Tess for several years before you went public. What held you back?
Oh, just, I think, worrying about what people would say. And also, I think I just wanted a bit of space, if I'm honest, for something that was maybe really important to me. And I thought, actually, if I'm happy and we're happy, then I'm not sure I need to do an announcement. But after a while, I thought, actually, if I don't, I'm part of the problem, aren't I? Because I'm kind of giving an impression that I think there's an issue when I don't think there is. So I just thought, right, let's just get on with it.
And you're a very senior politician at the time. Did any of your colleagues treat you differently?
No. I mean, I think this is the whole thing. I got this flood of lovely response from Parliament, and I remember Yvette Cooper coming up to me, and from Cabinet colleagues and from the wider world. I mean, it was to some extent, you know, felt it wasn't at all a non-event, but actually in terms of for other people in that situation, it just was better afterwards. You know, going back to what I campaign on social mobility, you can't be at your best if you can't be yourself. There were personal interviews as a cabinet minister I just didn't do, because I just thought, what am I going to say if they say in passing, oh, you know, and you're in a relationship, Justine, and I just thought, and I couldn't ever lie. Do you see what I mean? That would have been untenable for me. So I tended to not do any of that stuff, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. so sort of, you know, you being open, I think, is really important for people to be themselves at work.
Right, back to politics. So we're in a period of strikes. In two of the sectors where we're seeing strikes, schools and transport, they were cabinet positions that you held. Would you, at a time of industrial unrest, get around the table with those with the unions that are striking to try and hammer out a deal?
I'd always get around the table with them, and not when things went wrong and there was a strike. So I remember seeing people like Bob Crow, and that's how I got to know Francis O'Grady when I was at Transport.
TUC General Secretary.
TUC General Secretary. We ended up looking at the work we could do together on getting more women into transport. You know, my dad worked in British Steel. He was on strike, you know, in the 1980s. I don't think he wanted to be on strike, but he was. And so I grew up in a community where I really understood and saw the role that unions played. I didn't always agree with how they used that power in a sense, but I also understood, for bad reasons, and how my dad was treated often at work, why those sorts of conditions for people really, really matter. So now I'd always enjoyed seeing the unions, and particularly the teaching unions. And my pitch to them was, there's bound to be areas where we disagree, but actually let's never let that stop us from working on the stuff that we all passionately do agree on, and we can make some progress on. And actually, you know, we're grown-ups, aren't we? We're not going to agree on everything. They would always understand there was an affordability issue on pay, but what I needed to do as a Secretary of State was to understand where they were coming from and understand the broader issues in the workplace, and to what extent, you know, I can go there, maybe on pay, but it's easier for me to try and take other steps that can also help. And I think that's just seeing how you can meet people on their own terms, but at least doing it understanding where they're coming from and not having a disagreement because you haven't bothered to even find out really where they're coming from.
Now, social mobility is your life story, but it's also been your passion, your hallmark throughout politics, and it is what you have dedicated your life to post-Parliament. So you run the Social Mobility Pledge, which works with businesses, gets businesses to sign up to how they can be better at social mobility in their workforce. Is there a particular company that stands out to you, that you work with, that you think that company really gets shop floor to top floor?
I can think of one that's, it does facilities management, and it genuinely has worked out how a huge, diverse workforce that it has can get in and get on and get right to the top. And in an era where we're all talking about cost of living, all of that really matters. You know, you can argue that there are no low-paid roles, only employers who haven't worked out how people in those roles get the next step up the ladder and get not just the learning and development they need, but the confidence and the support and if you like, the additional stuff to be able to always say, right, here's where I go next. That for me is really important. And the Social Mobility Pledge was about really getting companies to think as innovatively about people as they had done about planet, in a nutshell, Gloria. And I was saying to them, look, every single one of your opportunities can change your life. And so if I think about what happened to my own life after I left the education system and how I was able to progress, all of that was in the private sector. And so they were all businesses I worked for who kind of took a decision about what opportunity I could get next. So my point to them was, you're actually going to be the people who deliver levelling up. And even if I'd been education secretary and closed every gap that happens in the education system, my pitch to them was and is, if you're not open to that wider talent pool, then we won't drive levelling up. We talk about social mobility, we tend to think about education, which is of course correct, but this issue of employment and opportunity has really been a black box, and you spent a long time in politics as I did, and really we just tend to talk about unemployment levels, don't we? We're not really talking about almost this quality of work and can the role you're in open up the next step for you, and is that fair at the moment? And the answer is it's not always fair, and opportunities aren't always open, and tackling that's a key way that will drive social mobility.
Good luck with that. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you, Justine Greening.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dave Penman, leader of the top civil servants trade union.
If you want to raise a complaint against a minister, you've got to. There's no rules. There's no procedure you can go to. There's nothing you can go in writing.
Coming up is Conservative MP Sherilyn McCrory. It's heartbreaking.
We went in the next day to have the injection, which would put potassium into my baby's heart, and she would die. And that is the hardest thing that anybody would do.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Dave Penman, General Secretary of the 1st Division Association. That is the trade union that represents top civil servants. What's it like having politicians for your boss?
Well, I think for civil servants, they quite enjoy having politicians as the boss because a lot of them have joined the civil service to make a difference. Lots of people who do the sort of jobs that we represent have chosen public service when they could have gone elsewhere. And they do that because they want to make a difference. They want to influence ministers. They want to support government. They want to change the world. Why a lot of politicians come into government. So they want to work closely with ministers and support ministers in what they do. That's what drives them to become civil servants and drives them to get to the top of the civil service.
OK, let's talk about the allegations that have been made from some of your members in relation to the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. You said in a previous interview that some civil servants were bullied, allegedly, and suffered mental health crises. Really?
Yeah, I mean, the cases I've been dealing with, those individuals, it's taken a lot for them to come forward with a complaint. It's not an easy thing to do, to complain about a minister. It's never easy to challenge that sort of behaviour. And they've done that because of the absolutely devastating effect it had on them. Now, that's been investigated. It's right that that investigation concludes on the facts that people are bringing forward to it. But when I see stories that look to kind of belittle the conduct and suggest that civil servants are snowflakes, as some former ministers have talked about this, it doesn't really chime with the evidence and the experience of those that I've dealt with. So that's why I talked about that, about the impact it's had on people.
And this investigation, while it is going on, Dominic Raab has said he has behaved professionally at all times. Just want to put that on the record. Obviously, the investigation will take its course. How do you define bullying?
There is no legal definition of bullying, and so it can take many forms. It's often characterised around shouting and swearing. There were accusations against another minister around shouting and swearing.
Remind us who that was.
With Priti Patel, and the evidence suggested that's what she had done. She'd shouted and swore at her civil servants. She
would have denied that.
She denied it, but she was found guilty of it by an independent investigation. But it can take the form of microaggressions. It can be about control. It can be about demeaning individuals. People don't have to shout to intimidate people. So bullying can take many forms. It's an abuse of power. At its heart, that's what it is. And where you have a differential in a power dynamic, so a government minister, in this case a deputy prime minister, one of the most powerful people in the country, and a civil servant working for them, then potentially you can have an abuse of that power relationship. And as I say, it can take many forms. Most people in working life have come across bullies. You'll have experienced that as managers or work colleagues. You'll have seen what it looks like. And I think that's why it's quite insulting when some people talk about this and talk about, hard management or, demanding a lot from people. Everyone knows the difference between a bully and a good manager who is demanding and expects high standards. They're very different things.
So at the time of recording, there is a piece in the Financial Times. We're recording on Thursday, the day that piece appears. It makes reference to how the Deputy Prime Minister deals with policy papers submitted by civil servants, grading them on a scale of 1 to 4. Some people might say, well, it's helpful feedback. Is that bullying?
It depends, because I suspect what you're getting, and this is the difficulty just now, is you're getting a partial picture. You're getting isolated instances taken out of context and saying, is that one thing on its own bullying? If you can imagine, if someone created 100 rules around how you performed, many of which could be contradictory, and was demeaning and insulting to you if you didn't meet any of those 100 potentially contradictory rules. You could take one of those rules out and say, well, that in itself, is that important? But if there are 100 rules that make it impossible, essentially, for you to do your job properly or to do it to the level that's expected, then that's when you can see how those patterns of behaviour can potentially become bullying and controlling.
And just to stick with this Financial Times piece, they spoke to 5 senior civil servants. 4 said they believed Dominic Raab's conduct involved bullying. The 5th defended the Deputy Prime Minister and highlighted his grading of officials' papers as a way for him to assess whether the quality of departmental material was improving or not over time. So it's tough, isn't it? Because there are the same people doing a job now. Admittedly, a majority of the civil servants that the Financial Times spoke to suggested that there was a bullying culture, accused him of bullying. But another one said, well, no, it's fine.
And different people react to behaviours in different ways. It also can depend what the nature of your relationship is with an individual. So it depends on that power dynamic. Are you working directly for someone? Do they have that power over you? Or are you perhaps a more senior person who's kind of peripheral and just sees some of the bits of conduct around when you interact with that individual? It can be very different, which is why, again, when other government ministers say, well, you know, Dominic Raab or anybody else has never kind of bullied me, he's always been good with me. Well, you would expect that because the power dynamic between a minister and other people, particularly those around the cabinet table, is going to be very different from those with individual civil servants. So there's going to be a lot in that, and that's why there has to be a proper investigation. But we're talking about, at this point in time, we think more than 24 civil servants have come forward, 8 separate complaints, 3 different government departments over a period of 4 years. So all of that has to be investigated. That doesn't mean he's guilty, but it suggests there's something quite substantial here around his conduct that so many civil servants, and it's not easy to complain about a government minister, so many civil servants have come forward over such a long period of time with complaints. And we need to find out what that is. That's why it's really important that someone looks at all of this evidence and says, well, actually, what is the impact of this? The issue about bullying is not just about what people do, it's about what the impact of what they do.
After the break, Dave Penman reveals who the best cabinet ministers are to work with.
Michael Gove, very respectful of his civil servant.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, is Rishi Sunak on the verge of a Brexit breakthrough? Boris Johnson got Brexit done. If Sunak can make Brexit work, it will be a turning point for his premiership. In My Take at 10, Prince Andrew is likely to be turfed out of his £30 million royal lodge, with King Charles tightening the purse strings. Good news, it's time the pompous prince paid his own way. And my Mark Meets guest is Brexit-supporting Tory legend Sir Bill Cash. We're live at 9.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
As a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Does the process work? The process where people feel that they are being treated badly or bullied at work, the process by which they can raise their concerns. Obviously, it is not normal when they are elected politicians appointed by the Prime Minister.
It's completely dysfunctional. So if you want to raise a complaint against a minister, you've got to, there's no rules. There's no procedure you can go to. There's nothing you can go in writing. You raise it with your permanent secretary. That then gets taken to the Cabinet Office. It gets taken to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has to agree to an investigation. So the Prime Minister can veto the investigation, and Rishi Sunak had an opportunity to put that aside. There have been recommendations to him by the Committee for Standards in Public Life that there should be a fully independent process. He decided not to have that. He wants to retain political control. Only he decides on the outcome of it. And we saw what happened with the Priti Patel investigation. The Prime Minister was forced into an investigation because a permanent secretary resigned. He sat on the outcome of that report for 6 months, because when we took Boris Johnson to court to challenge his decision on it, this all came out. And when it was eventually forced out of him, he refused to accept the evidence and the recommendations from his independent advisor that Priti Patel had breached the ministerial code, even though she was found to have sworn and shouted at civil servants, resulting in the resignation of his independent advisor. That had a chilling effect across the civil service, because it basically said it doesn't matter about the evidence. The Prime Minister is not interested in your welfare. He's interested in his own political expediency. And I've spoken to civil servants on the RAB case who have said that when they saw that decision, they said they weren't going to complain because they knew there was no point.
What should the process be?
Completely independent. So in Scotland, after what happened with the former First Minister, there were 2 separate inquiries. As a result of that, we work with the Scottish Government and we have a fully independent process. You raise a complaint, it's independently investigated, it's independently determined. So someone finds independently from the First Minister whether there's guilt or innocence on that accusation, and it's for the First Minister to decide punishment. So it's a way of separating the power of the Prime Minister or the First Minister from the actual investigative process.
To be fair to the Prime Minister, he's sort of indicated, dropped very heavy hints that he will act, which people interpret as he will sack Dominic Raab if the bullying inquiry finds him guilty.
Well, yes, he said that, but also he's refused to answer a direct question of whether he was aware of bullying allegations against Dominic Raab when he appointed him. So 5 times he refused to answer that direct question, hiding behind the fact there had been no formal complaints. And when he appointed his ethics advisor in December, after this investigation was launched, he decided to keep the remit that Boris Johnson had for his ethics advisor, which means he retains a veto on whether there's investigation and only he determines the outcome. So yes, he said some positive things and he talked about integrity and accountability when he walked into Parliament, but he'll be judged by his actions on this. And up till now, there are questions about the choices and actions that he's taken.
It must be quite a difficult time for Dominic Raab. It must be incredibly stressful. The inquiries, they're not quick, these things. We don't know, but if it was me, it would be causing me sleepless nights. Is there a danger that you're bullying?
I don't think you can say that people who are accusing some of the most powerful people in the country are kind of reverse bullying. It's really, really difficult to challenge that sort of behaviour in any workplace. It's almost impossible in the civil service because of the process that you have to go through and the hoops that you have to jump through. You cannot underestimate how difficult it has been for these individuals to challenge that. What should have happened here, because if this was any other workplace and Dominic Raab was any other employee, he would have been suspended. If any employer was faced with this level of accusations, the breadth of it, the scale of it, they would have taken a decision to suspend someone while they conduct an investigation. And he's not. He's still in post, and the Prime Minister has refused to do that. So Dominic Raab has not been treated worse than other employees. He's been treated better than any employee up and down the country would be treated.
Is it hard for people in the department to go to work at the moment?
It will be. It can be easy. You imagine working in that department and having had the courage to raise a complaint against the Deputy Prime Minister of the country and still having to walk in the front door when he's the Minister at that point in time, that cannot be easy for those individuals who are still working in the department. And I know it's not easy for civil servants who are not working in the department. No one wants to be in this position. No one wants to have their name revealed to the Deputy Prime Minister as someone who's complained against them. No one wants to deal with that. They want these things to be dealt with more effectively earlier on. And it takes a lot to actually come forward and raise that sort of complaint. So I can't imagine what it's like to be one of those complainants working in a department where Dominic Raab's still the Secretary of State.
Let's try and bring some positivity as we conclude this interview. First of all, can you give some advice perhaps to cabinet ministers on how they might be a good boss? Are there exemplars out there you think, you know what, that cabinet minister was really great?
So it's interesting, when you talk to civil servants, quite often the public persona of ministers is not necessarily what they experience, and they'll talk about ministers who perhaps have got quite a bad reputation about being really good ministers. The civil service has a duty under its code to provide ministers with the best professional, evidence-based advice. It's why we have a permanent and impartial civil servant. So the civil service says to ministers, this is what the evidence shows, Minister. You make a decision on this, but this is my advice around it. Good ministers listen to that. They respect that advice. They can disagree with it. They ultimately make decisions, but they understand that civil servants are doing their job to provide, which quite often can be challenging. As a minister, you can come with preconceived ideas and to find those challenged by the evidence. That's the nature of politics and government. But actually understanding and respecting that, even if you ignore it, which you're free to do as a minister. But you also need to encourage it. Because that challenge, why the civil service is set up that way, is to make for better government, to make for better policy, to allow the civil service to essentially, to some degree, challenge those preconceived ideas. Even though ultimately ministers make the final decision, that challenge makes for better policy decisions. It gets the difficulties out of the way. And ministers need to create an environment where they welcome that challenge. Good ministers too, because they're confident of their own ability, they're confident of their views, and they're also confident enough to change their mind if the evidence suggests something different. That's what good ministers do, and there's plenty of good ministers out there.
You don't want to single anyone out as a particular exemplar. You don't have to.
No,
it might be
I mean,
there
are plenty of them. I mean, people often talk about Michael Gove, right? You know, so talk about a very high-profile current minister, Michael Gove, very respectful of his civil servants, has a really good reputation with civil servants. He understands the nature of being a minister. It's a difficult job. And he understands and respects the value of the civil service. Lord Mandelson was a very popular minister when in the Labour government years, applauded when he returned back to kind of DTI spontaneously, kind of stuff, because again, he spoke to civil servants there and said he was really respectful of their opinion, understood his role, which was to make decisions, understood the role of civil servants, which was to give them robust advice.
Dave Penman, it's so important on this channel, on this programme, that we get the views of trade union leaders, that we get views from across the political spectrum. Fascinating to hear your thoughts, because you have a very unique job representing workers in a very unique situation. Dave Penman, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, Conservative MP Sherilyn McCrory.
She handed me my baby and I spoke to her for a little bit and I gave her a kiss. And still didn't know she was a girl, actually. And then I said goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Cheryl McCrory, Conservative MP since 2019. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about a very tough experience that you went through in this interview. I'd like to take you back to the 3rd of January 2019, when you and your husband were at the routine 20-week scan for your second baby.
So I was pregnant with second baby, already had a beautiful 4-year-old girl, and no problems with the pregnancy, although I was over 40. So I'd gone through the 12-week bit where you think that's where you're going to have worries, that's where you're going to see age-related abnormalities, and that had all gone brilliantly. They were really happy with the way the pregnancy was going. They were happy for me to go to the maternity-led unit to give birth again, so, you know, perfectly healthy. Went along to the 20-week scan. Actually, my husband almost didn't come because we were that relaxed about how things were going, but he did, thank goodness. And I lay there and they put the gel on and there was a big pause and you think, crikey, what, you know, is they're hoping they're just finding what's happening. And then he said the words I won't ever forget, which are, something's not right. And you just freeze, actually, you freeze. And you wait and you wait and you wait and they say, yeah, something's not right. There's a problem with the spine, there's a problem with the brain. But what he can't do is diagnose what's happened. Because he's just looking at the baby's picture. So, you know, we're frozen, we're sort of trying to hold back the tears but hoping for the best. But so when you go for these scans where I live, it's at a maternity-led unit locally to me. So what they did was make an appointment at the main hospital. We went over very quickly, so that was amazing. And, you know, panicking along the way to wonder what's going to happen.
This same day?
Same day, within, you know, an hour and a half or whatever. And then you meet the consultant and you know something's going to go horribly wrong because they met you with the bereavement midwife and they were so lovely, but you're just waiting for them to tell you what is what. And we didn't know she was a little girl at that stage. You know, we were a sort of family that didn't find out, so we were waiting for that surprise. And that is relevant to what I come to a bit later. So they diagnosed very, very, very severe spina bifida in our baby. She was already very, very badly brain damaged. But the tragedy for me there was I'd already felt her kicking for quite a number of weeks. So for me, she was just a very healthy little girl. So it was very difficult to compute what was going on there. And then they stayed with us for an awfully long time. And you sort of wait for them to tell you what happens next. And I just assumed that I would be going under a general anaesthetic and, in inverted commas, it would be taken care of. And my worst fear that I've had, it's bizarre that it's happened to me, was that I would have to go through childbirth and not have a baby at the end of it. So when I was told that that's what they expected to do, that was the worst bit for me. I think there's lots of worse bits. And then they're not allowed to tell you that you're going to terminate the pregnancy, but it was the shake of the head. You know, there's nothing they can do. And so you have to sign a form that consents to infanticide. That's the word they use. And we went in the next day to have the injection, which would put potassium into my baby's heart, and she would die. And that is the hardest thing that anybody would do. It's completely counterintuitive to what a mum or a parent is expected to do. You know, the team there couldn't have made it any more bearable because they really were very kind to us. But there's no getting away from it. You have to go through that, and it takes about the procedure takes about 10 or 15 minutes. And I was so frightened because it's just completely counterintuitive. So that was on the Friday, and then you have to wait 48 hours before you can deliver. It took a longer time to deliver this baby than my first pregnancy.
8.5 hours.
Yeah,
you were in labour.
Yes, and then finally my waters broke, and she delivered very quickly after that. But the hard thing was how differently my husband and I dealt with this, because I think for men sometimes, certainly by the 20-week scan, often it can just be a pregnancy. Whereas if you're carrying the baby, it's a baby. And that's not a criticism at all. I think it's just the way things are often processed. And he just, couldn't face seeing her, actually, which was fine because, everybody has to cope with it in their own way. So when she delivered, he went out and went for a walk and rang family and that sort of thing. And the midwives, there was a new midwife that had just come on, and she was amazing. Her name was Kat. And she handed me my baby, and I spoke to her for a little bit, and I gave her a kiss. And still didn't know she was a girl, actually. And then I said goodbye. And I'll never forget the midwife who, she just said, is it okay if I take your baby outside to look at the stars? Which made her feel like a real person, actually. So when we talk about the NHS staff, that is the kindness that we're dealing with, and I'll never forget it. Sorry. And then
take time.
Yeah, and then we went home. And the tragedy of our story was the next day was my husband's birthday, so it was we were just desperate to get it all done and dusted before his day, so that in years to come, that remained his day, and that previous weekend remained Lily's weekend. And then it was after that I was told she was a little girl, and we named her, and it all became very real. And the reason why I think the difference between how my husband saw this and how I see it is relevant is because the advice I give to anybody who has gone through losing a baby, either at 20 weeks delivering or later, is that parents will, they'll grieve in very different ways. And the stat that I heard at the beginning was that 50% of relationships will break up because of an experience like this. And so the advice I give is lean on outside of the family, because the person that you expect to lean on might not be there for you, and it's not their fault. So, yeah.
How do you mark her memory?
Whenever I can, actually, usually alone, usually by myself. So we don't mark her anniversary as such. What I do is I have little mementos around the house, little angels, sort of little angel ornaments or baubles on the tree or something like that, that I know are Lily's. And I have a memory box, another thing that most hospitals do well now, which is where they give you lots of memories of your baby. So you can, you have little memento where you took half and they took half, and photographs, little keepsakes. And I keep it hidden, and then when I want to think about her, I'll look at it and I'll remember that day. A bit like now, actually. It's been a while since I've had tears. And I have to say to anybody who has gone through this or is going through this, it feels like that pain will never go away. But it gets much, much easier, and you find actually you go for days without, not without thinking about them, but without it owning you.
You've said more needs to be done to support bereaved families who have lost babies. What would you like to see done?
Well, when I joined the all-party group for baby loss as a brand new MP, the reason I went was because we were looked after so well in the hospital. But where, and this is no fault of theirs, where there was lacking afterwards was the follow-up counselling. We relied on the charities. I was given some counselling through my work. But my husband was never ever offered. I think he was offered, but he was never able. It was never taken up. He was never, given a date where he could go in and talk about what had happened with any of the bereavement counsellors at the hospital. And I think it was a resource thing. So I didn't want the men to be forgotten in this. Everybody always asks how mum is getting on, and they there's still a feeling that dad should be there to support mum. And it was my very strong feeling that actually both parents needed to be supported equally. And that was the reason I went along to that first meeting. it was the most busy all-party group meeting I'd been to. I mean,
These
a lot of them have, these are the cross-party groups in Parliament.
Groups, yes.
A lot of them you just get, one or two MPs who are desperately trying to do something. This had, over 50 people sitting in the room, not all parliamentarians, people from the sector, bereaved parents. And they talked about the National Care Bereavement Pathway, which is what we had obviously experienced very successfully in Cornwall. But it's not in every trust. It's not mandated to be in every trust. So what I would like to do is mandate that for every trust. And I'd like to see every trust coming forward to say that they now have that in place, so that all parents get cared for in the same way that we did. But also I'd like to add to that to make sure that all parents get those follow-up counselling sessions together or separately, probably more successfully separately, so that they can grieve in their own ways and still be there to support each other when the time is right. So that's number one. And number two, we just need to have more staff in the maternity area, so that and more specialised staff in the maternity area, so that when things do go wrong, in every trust, parents are listened to and their wishes are carried out.
How long did you have counselling for?
I had 6 weeks. So I was a Cornwall counsellor, and it was through there that I was able to access that counselling. And it was just a kind lady who works at Cornwall Council said, "You do know you're entitled to do this." Normally they wait about 3 months after a bereavement before they start, but actually I had mine quite early. And you go through all sorts of emotions. You're 1 week you're just in shock. Another week you can be disbelief. How has it happened? Anger. I raged at the world a lot in my car by myself. And I think, it's the normal grieving process. I think when you lose a baby, though, there's an extra, and the only word I can use for it is primal, where you just need to be pregnant and have your baby with you. And I used to try and joke with people, use the analogy of when penguins steal other eggs because they've lost their baby. It is that feeling. It's just a primal feeling that you have no control over, that 1 minute you were pregnant and now you're not. There's no baby there. Yeah.
Final question. The government has this target to halve the rate of stillbirths and neonatal deaths by 2025. It's not very long away.
Yeah.
Do they need to do more? Do they need to step it up? What's the most important part of that ambition? We had an inquiry, I think last year, where we were about halfway through that, and they were on track, actually, which was great news. But it's staffing is all I can say in the maternity sector. It's about it's what we hear in the NHS all the time. It's about retention. It's about looking after your staff. It's a vocation to be a midwife. It's certainly a vocation to be a bereavement midwife. It's one of the hardest jobs that people can do, and very special people do it. So we need to give them all the support we can. The other shocking thing that I have found while doing this role is that if you're Black or from an ethnic minority, you are far more likely to lose your baby and actually potentially die in childbirth. That's something that's come out of this. And one of the things we can use to counter that is the continuity of carer. So the same midwife or couple of midwives throughout your entire pregnancy. It also helps if you're living in social deprivation, if there's worries of lifestyle issues, domestic violence at home, coercion, that sort of thing. If you have the same midwife, the amount of difference that can make to the baby and the mum's outcomes is phenomenal. So I'm a huge advocate for trying to make sure that every mum has a continuity of carer in their pregnancy. It's a huge privilege to meet you, to listen to you, for you to be so open about the trauma that you've been through, for you to talk about the solutions that you're campaigning for. We'll go and get a tissue, both of us now, I think. Thank you, Sherilyn McCrory. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm back next Sunday at 6. Thanks for watching.
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. I'm Jonathan Fortree. We do have a few sunny intervals around this afternoon, but the general theme for the next few days is a cloudy one. Frontal systems pushing their way across the northern half of the UK will bring a more unsettled picture here. Although we have high pressure in the south, the feed of southwesterly winds coming in off the Atlantic is going to slowly build the clouds here. So a few clear intervals for central southeastern areas of England throughout this evening, but the cloud tending to build as we move throughout the night. And some bits of drizzle are possible for Northern Ireland, parts of Western England and Wales. More extensive rain moving into Scotland. This will be accompanied by some particularly strong winds, up to 60, 70 mile an hour gusts are possible, so do just take care here. Underneath the cloud, though, it's going to be a mild night for all of us. Some places holding up around 10, 11 degrees Celsius. The rain across Scotland will tend to stall into Monday, so could turn into a fairly damp and drizzly day here. For the north of that will be some sunny intervals for the Northern Isles, but it's going to remain particularly gusty across Shetland. For Northern Ireland, England and Wales, it will be a cloudy day. The odd break is possible, perhaps for parts of Herefordshire, Northumberland, so temperatures could reach 15, 16 degrees Celsius, but we'll retain that cloud as we move into the evening period. Again, some drizzle is possible. The rain in the north gradually shifting its way off more into parts of the Highlands and eventually clearing its way off to the Northern Isles as well. But the vast majority of us will again remain frost-free as we move into the start of Tuesday. Looking to be another fairly cloudy day for all of us. Again, the odd glimmer of sunshine might come through, but for most of us we will see fairly grey skies. Into Wednesday, we'll start to see this frontal system shift its way southeastwards across the country, and that will bring in a slight change to our weather. We start feeding in some northerly winds, and so it will turn brighter for a time, but we'll also see temperatures just falling off that bit more. Enjoy your day.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join